1, 2, 3.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale, and I won't have it! You think you merely stopped a business deal? That is not the case. The Arabs have taken millions of dollars out of this country, and now they must put it back! It is ebb and flow, tidal gravity, it is ecological balance. There are no nations, there are no peoples, there are no nations, there are no Arabs, there are no third worlds, there is no West. There is only one holistic system, our system. You get up on your little 21-inch screen and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime.
Welcome to the Eschaton Review, a podcast that's been having human moments in World War III since 1983. Suspended 250 miles above sea level in my extremely above-ground bunker, in orbit at 17,000 miles per hour, I bear witness to the full scope of the planet every 93 minutes. I cycle through 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every 24 of your Earth hours. I peer out of my porthole and contemplate the events below, and compile them into these transmissions, which I disseminate every 112 orbits, or 1 Earth week for you terra firma freaks out there. As I now take a gander at my former planet, the eastern half of the North and South American continents coalesce within the irreducible qualia of my consciousness, this tangled jungle of mystery between the ears. Our timestamp comes from the shores of the Champlain Sea in Canada's capital city of Ottawa, where it is currently 8:28 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Wednesday, October 9th, year of our Lord, 2024. Zooming further in upon Ottawa, we reach the Library and Archives of Canada and a curiously titled landmark called the Secret Bench of Knowledge, which has 2 reviews, both 5 stars, on Google Maps. Harry Bradley writes, "Cute statue, and definitely a good place for a selfie." Richard Kiefel, "Great site, good place for a selfie." End of reviews. This statue, the Secret Bench of Knowledge, it's inscribed with many messages written by school children about the importance and pleasure of reading. Very wholesome. I'd sure like to snap a selfie there one day. And hopefully, when that day arrives, I can also visit the now long-delayed erection, pause, of the Memorial to the Victims of Communism. Canada, a Land of Refuge, for the full title. And there I can snap a photo with over 330 Nazi and otherwise fascist names of the brave and fallen. Yes, ever since the whole Canadian Parliament gives multiple standing ovations to a certified, verified, bona fide Ukrainian Nazi. Remember that? Remember that one, folks? Ever since then, the construction of the old Victims of Communism memorial's been on an indefinite delay. Although the website of the Canadian government is still excitedly saying it'll be up any day now. The project had a further setback recently when it was revealed that at least 330, that's more than half of the 553 names intended to be memorialized, are of Nazi and Nazi collaborators alike. This story broke on October 7th, 2 days ago, and I have a little bit more info on it here from the Ottawa Citizen. The Victims of Communism Memorial faces call to remove over 330 names linked to Nazis, fascists. The memorial was supposed to be unveiled in November 2023, but that was put on hold after questions surfaced about many of the names listed. The memorial, which is located near the corner of Wellington and Bay Streets, is supposed to honor those who suffered under communism. But concerns have been raised over the years by Jewish organizations and historians that names of Eastern Europeans who collaborated with the Nazis in the Holocaust have been put forward in an attempt to whitewash their past. The memorial was supposed to be unveiled November 2023, but that was put on hold after members of parliament honored Yaroslav Hunka, a Ukrainian soldier in the Waffen-SS Galicia division, a volunteer unit that was under the command of the Nazis. That incident became an international embarrassment for Canada. I feel like that was pretty quickly forgotten, and not a whole big stink was really made of it outside of, I guess, alternative media, if I'm remembering correctly. That's how I remember it. And then the rest of the article, I don't know, it kind of explains itself. There's some funny bits where it's just like people saying the most obvious shit, like, well, gee whiz, we sure like this memorial, but I think it could be problematic to have Nazi names displayed as if they're great heroes. It could be a slight issue. In the final paragraph here, gives us a little more information to chew on for a second. The memorial has already been the focus of multiple controversies over its exact purpose, location, size, and cost over the last 15 years. My just initial reaction was, like they just decided to build this thing, like, pretty recently. But no, they've had 15 years. It seems implausible that someone hadn't figured out that a bunch of these names, more than half of them, belong to actual members of the Nazi Party, or some of the examples listed here were the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, which I believe was the Bandera's group, which is just collaborators and I believe somewhat overseen by the actual Nazi German military, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, and to a lesser extent the Baltic nationalist groups, for example, members of the Latvian SS. Also, the price of this thing got out of control. Current price is ballooned to an estimated $7.5 million, including $6 million in public funds from an original budget of $1.5 million. That was supposed to be funded entirely through private donations from something called Tribute to Liberty. I didn't look into what that is. Who cares? So, be interesting to see where this memorial ends up. How many if they're just left with like 3 names, and even those guys are like slightly suspect. I believe that's all for Canadian news this week. But it dovetails nicely into the next batch of articles here about Ukraine, the Ukrainian Nazi, etc. Seems there's a sea change. Feels like it's been in slow motion a little bit for, I don't know, like a year now or something. With the U.S. like giving less support, moral, financial, and otherwise, to Zelensky, kind of stringing him along. And now a lot of major outlets are saying what critics of this proxy war have been saying since basically the beginning, including the old Financial Times, hardly a Putin puppet outlet. Although who knows? So much shit just gets called like Russian or Putin puppetry. Maybe now this will also I saw something the other day that was like NAFO is itself a Putin op because these NAFO memesters are so like despicable and gross online that it must be an op to make NATO enthusiasts look bad, which is pretty hilarious. But yes, FT, Financial Times. I have kind of a summary of this article here from one Ivan Kachanovsky, someone I've recently started following on Twitter. By the looks of his last name, he's some sort of Ukrainian or something. Russian, I don't know. He's a political scientist at the University of Ottawa. Hey, another overlap from the last little bits there. He does research in politics, conflicts, policy, and political communication in Ukraine, US, and Canada. Ex-Harvard. And blah, blah, blah. Okay. He writes here, finally, FT reports Ukraine is, quote, losing on the battlefield. Biden administration is aware that its present strategy is not sustainable because, quote, we are losing the war. U.S. officials were unimpressed by Zelensky's, quote, victory plan. Ukraine's new foreign minister, quote, struck a more pragmatic tone on the possibility of a land for security negotiation. If you get into any negotiation, it could be a trigger for social instability, says a Ukrainian official. Zelensky knows this very well. There will always be a radical segment of Ukrainian society that will call any negotiation capitulation. The far right in Ukraine is growing. The right wing is a danger to democracy, says Meritsko, who is an MP for Zelensky's Servant of the People Party. Fun fact I never tire of mentioning, I guess, whenever it pops up, is that Zelensky's foray into politics, well, number one, it was brought on basically by an extremely seedy Ukrainian oligarch. Can I remember his name off the top of my head? Igor Kolomoisky, something like that. I think Biden banned him from the United States. That's how bad he was. Also, probably maybe Joe and Hunter, got into some bad wheelings and dealings with him in Ukraine. Who knows? He's like a super corrupt oligarch. But anyway, he basically picked Zelensky, this goofball comedian who played the president in a comedy sitcom, and they named they invented a new political party and named it the exact name of the comedy TV show. Be like Trump starting the Apprentice Party or something. The You're Fired Party. So yeah, Servant of the People. That was the name of Zelensky's show and his current political party. So the point is that even people within his own party are saying he's got to cut the shit and start negotiating some sort of peace agreement, because Ukraine is obviously just taking a lot of L's, to put it lightly, and that always was going to. The idea that Ukraine ever was going to just defeat Russia once and for all. I mean, whatever your ideology is, whatever you think about even the Russian invasion, it should be so obvious that the Russian military is just orders of magnitude superior to Ukraine. And fuck what America gives Ukraine. We're giving them fucking a couple of little rockets and shit. Anyway, I have digressed. Continuing this summary / quotations from the article. Ukraine is heading into what may be its darkest moment of the war so far. It is losing on the battlefield in the east of the country, with Russian forces advancing relentlessly, albeit at immense cost in men and equipment. It is struggling to restore its depleted ranks with motivated and well-trained soldiers, while an arbitrary military mobilization system is causing real social tension. It is also facing a bleak winter of severe power and potentially heating outages. The Biden administration is aware that its present strategy is not sustainable because, quote, we are losing the war, says Jeremy Shapiro, head of the Washington office of the European Council on Foreign Relations. They are thinking of how to move that war to a greater quiescence. That's take two after looking up the word quiescence and how to say it. I'll assume some of you, like me, never heard this word before. It means inactivity or dormancy. Example, this method has been shown to induce sleep-like quiescence in adult animals. Quiescence. Okay, learned a new word today. Thanks European Council on Foreign Relations guy, Jeremy Schlapino. U.S. officials were unimpressed by Zelensky's, quote, victory plan, which includes requests for massive amounts of Western weaponry. I mean, this has been the story the whole time. Like, nothing. That's kind of the main point of me even bringing this up, is that this is all just more of the same. Zelensky constantly asking for every weapon under the sun, for no-fly zone, blah blah blah, like, and him just getting strung along. And this other move here is like, oh hey, I guess there are far-right influences that are making things untenable in Ukraine after all. We had no idea, other than the fact that U.S. mainstream news reported on this shit since 2014 at least, up until basically 2022, when it became impolite to mention the fact that there's like a serious white supremacist, ultra-nationalist infestation going on. But now it's, oh yeah, that's there too. We remembered. Or actually, it's brand new, but you know. Ukraine's new foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha, used private meetings with Western counterparts on his first trip to the U.S. to discuss potential compromise solutions, the diplomat said, and struck a more pragmatic tone on the possibility of land for security negotiations than his predecessor. We are talking more and more openly about how this ends and what Ukraine would have to give up in order to get a permanent peace deal, says one of the diplomats, who is present in New York. And that's a major change from even 6 months ago, when this kind of talk was taboo. To further illustrate how bad things have gotten in Ukraine, as I've talked about before, there's a kind of an epidemic of going AWOL, and also of people dying like within days of joining up with the military, and poor training because they just literally don't have people left to like train soldiers. There's a severe lack, and the average age of Ukrainian soldiers now is 45, which is kind of insane and unheard of for any military in the world. To add to that, just read what friend of the podcast, so to speak, Branko Marcetic, had to say. He said, the Biden administration and NATO now not just rhetorically support Zelensky kidnapping Ukrainians and sending them to die on the front lines, they actively help him do it. Note the silence from those who moralized and cried crocodile tears over Ukrainians and their, quote, agency to argue for war. So he's commenting on an article here. The police say that together with the USA and Interpol, they blocked the channel of escape of Ukrainians to the EU. This comes from a Ukrainian website that I had to translate, obviously. Here's some snippets from it. The police say that together with the USA and Interpol, they blocked the channel of escape of Ukrainians to the EU, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and Interpol helped in this. It is reported that this was a, quote, large-scale scheme of transporting men of military age from Ukraine to the countries of the European Union. In total, it is known about the illegal transportation of about 40 people, for which they paid $10,000 each. The police know that the suspects created a closed Telegram channel where they offered their services and instructed customers. After paying the advance, the fugitives were supposed to reach Lviv, and from there the criminals transported them to Transcarpathia by mountain roads. Later the men were hidden in the homes of the perpetrators, after which they were transported across the border, bypassing the checkpoints to Romania. According to the report, in cooperation with the investigation department of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Ukrainian law enforcement officers uncovered the location of one of the organizers of the criminal scheme, who, after fleeing from Ukraine to the U.S., coordinated the activities of accomplices and distributed money. The organizers of the scheme were notified of suspicion under the article Illegal Transportation of Persons Across the State Border of Ukraine. One of them is already under arrest, currently efforts are underway to identify other members of the criminal group and arrest them. The police say that the perpetrators face up to 9 years in prison with confiscation of property. I assume that means confiscation of the $10,000 in cash, which is shown in one of those classic style police photos where they lay out, money and drugs or whatever, and gloat about it. You see a bunch of stacks of money. So yeah, I mean, even the U.S. is in on don't think you can get away that easily. We said we would fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. You seem Ukrainian to me. Are you the last one? So that's grim. That's fucked up. Just about as grim and fucked up as a bunch of insane warmongering lunatics in the comments of this thing saying these people get what they deserve, they're betraying the Ukrainian cause, etc. I don't really need to go through this one, but I did find an article, and there's, I mentioned earlier, there was a time when this stuff got covered by mainstream media, the sort of poisonous influence of far-right groups in Ukraine. But I guess now they're admitting it again, so... but yeah, it's just another one that's showing directly how these groups changed policy and changed Zelensky in a lot of ways. The thing about Zelensky that's interesting is, as much as he's kind of this ridiculous clown, on the campaign trail, he was basically a peacenik. He said all kind of the right things, correct things, that is. Things that, of course, pissed off the Nazis. Let's try to get along with the Donbass region, who are ethnically Russian and speak the Russian language, and instead of outlawing the Russian language and treating them like shit and, eventually just dropping bombs on them for years on end. Yeah, he basically promised a lot of, pie in the sky type things. But once he was elected into office, he was more or less, pulled aside by the, minority... Well, I'm not trying to say that, Ukraine as a country is all Nazis. But the Nazi groups, as much of a statistical minority that they are, they have a fair amount of power. They're in actual government positions. Of course, have, special divisions in the military, like the famous Azov Battalion. They're just the most famous one. There are many more groups of their ilk. This is all to say that they eventually get Zelensky to change his tune. By eventually, I mean almost immediately, because nothing changed. All of his kind of peacenik promises fell at the wayside. I was noticing, just while looking at some of these articles for this today, even his appearance is so markedly different. He was clean shaven before. He wasn't always wearing his silly military tight t-shirt. I mean, he was never wearing that. I mean, I understand, you have to project certain image or whatever, but his whole thing now, just playing tough guy, essentially, is very different from who he was when he came into office. Anyway, point is people in the mainstream are starting to recognize reality to more of to a higher degree and a greater frequency than previously when it comes to Ukraine. Slowly but surely, I guess. Kamala Harris declines on 60 Minutes to say if she supports Ukraine's push for NATO membership. The headline pretty much says it all. It's just funny how little Kamala Harris knows about anything. So she just, when that happens, a lot of these interviews lately, it happened a few times in the 60 Minutes interview that I only saw just clips of, but she basically just says I'm not going to talk about hypotheticals or whatever. She was just going on about, this was about Iran, the one I'm remembering now off the top of my head, but the question was would you do a preemptive strike against Iran? And this was after she went on and on about how Iran is our single greatest enemy, blah, 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 blah. So would you preemptively strike our single greatest enemy? I'm not going to get into hypotheticals, even though she was just saying, like, if they get a nuke, you know, blah, 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 blah. But on the question of Ukraine, let's see, Harris asked if she would support the effort to expand NATO to include Ukraine in an interview with CBS News 60 Minutes that aired Monday. Said the question was among the, quote, issues that we will deal with if and when it arrives at that point. Oh, I love the way this broad speaks. Just filling the void with filler words. That's all it is. Like, it's kind of, her way of speaking is almost impressive. Although it's so grating at the same time, but like, she does really find a way to say so much while saying so very little at the same time. It's really, I mean, obviously I've noticed this in the past, but I was really noticing it a lot lately. And maybe that's just because she's finally being forced into like doing interviews lately. But anyway, so yeah, she's been given her talking point on Ukraine, and she can only say that. She has nothing else. She said, let's repeat it again. It's fun to listen to Kamala speak. That the question of Ukraine joining NATO was among the issues that we will deal with if and when it arrives at that point. It's very necessary to say at that point when you're talking about something arriving at the point that you already described previously in the sentence. She goes on to say, right now, we are supporting Ukraine's ability to defend itself against Russia's unprovoked aggression. You know it's a pre-planned talking point when you've got the words unprovoked aggression in there. That's just a little aside on Kamala and Ukraine. Final point on Ukraine is Grandma received 5 years in prison for 3 likes on Odnoklasniki, which is a Ukrainian social media network. The woman used the social network, which is banned in Ukraine. Sorry, it's a Russian social media network. The woman used the social media network, which was banned in Ukraine, and liked messages that were automatically displayed on her page in the newsfeed of her 178 friends. The Prylutsky City District Court of the Chernihiv region found the woman guilty of glorification of armed aggression of the Russian Federation. So, by all accounts that I've seen, and I did a little digging to make sure this wasn't like bullshit, because it sounds crazy. She has been, it's not one of those like she could be sentenced up to 5 years. It's like, no, she's been sentenced with 5 years. Maybe more, this story will come out later, and I mean, let's hope that it's not that bad, but it appears to be that bad right now. This was also on a Ukrainian website that I had to translate, so some of what I might read might sound a little off, whatever. The source on this was the court reporter with a reference to the court verdict. I think I pretty much described exactly what it is. Like, she didn't even purposely whatever these posts or whatever came up, but I guess it doesn't even matter because she's using the banned social media itself, which counts as glorifying Russian aggression, a serious crime that in the great democracy of Ukraine that has suspended all opposition political parties, all opposition media, and suspended presidential election, at least. I'm not sure about even the other elections, to be honest. Much exactly the same, actually, as Bibi in Israel, kind of hanging on to war because it's keeping his job intact. And Zelensky's essentially doing the same thing because it seems almost certain that if elections were held that he would be replaced with someone else, all things considered. Yeah, this is a fucked up story. I mean, this is the type of story you'd expect to hear out of crazy authoritarian Russia or China, which, to be fair, I know, people get jailed for certain things that we would just call, protected speech from time to time in those places, but this happened in Ukraine, and I was covering stuff about Ukraine. And I found a similar story right before I started recording, which has nothing to do with Ukraine, but it's similar in content, rather than geography. A Palestinian teacher from the north, a citizen of Israel, was arrested for sharing a social media, quote, memory yesterday that had nothing to do with last year's Hamas attack. She was doxxed by internet bully Daniel Amram and arrested by Ben Gvir's Gestapo with a blindfold, of course. And there's a picture of her blindfolded and in handcuffs with an Israeli flag behind her. Classic Ben Gvir Gestapo shit. This is definitely not the first time people have been arrested for social media posts in Israel. I remember seeing somewhere more at the beginning of last October footage of cops in the West Bank just like basically abducting people and then jailing them on spurious charges or non-existent charges, really, of you liked this certain post, therefore you are Hamas. You go to indefinite detention, administrative detention now. No trial, just in you go. In you go to the rape, murder, torture dungeon. I don't have much more information about this teacher. She's a citizen of Israel, but she's Palestinian, so she will be tried by the military court because it is an apartheid state. It's amazing to me that anyone denies this basic fact still. Hopefully, I don't know why anyone would have any hope for this, but hopefully she's not thrown in jail indefinitely for sharing a memory that appears to be also not anything to do with terrorism or whatever. But let's move on to our next nation state. We were in Canada before we took a look at Ukraine, but let's go south of Canada to the US of A. Everyone's favorite Lil Goebbels, Cunt Chocula himself, Matt Miller. I've got 2 clips of him getting more or less owned, as the kids say, in 2004. And the first one comes from a Gray Zone reporter who, shockingly, was in the press pool. I'm always a little shocked when people from publications like the Gray Zone are even allowed in the building. Liam Cosgrove. And this got a fair amount of traction on social media because people hate the smirking cunt of chocolate so much. I mean, the guy rattles off some good points, but like the main headline here is that he exasperatedly yelled out at Matt Miller, "People are sick of the bullshit." So everyone kind of cathartically, vicariously enjoyed the moment, and let's take a listen to it.
Israel is still poised to strike Iran, and in July, Blinken said that Iran was 1 to 2 weeks away from developing a nuclear weapon. So I guess for all we know, they might have one by now. And meanwhile, in Ukraine, they've struck deep within Russian territory several times, as deep as 300 miles from the border. And in that case, we don't have to guess. We know that Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal on the planet, as many as 6,000 warheads. And so one of the risks of arming militaries that are striking in the territories of nuclear powers is that one of those gets deployed, and then it could escalate very quickly from there. So it's rarely discussed, but it's important to address that the nuclear risk is real, and it could very abruptly mean the end of, what humans have worked for thousands of years to collectively achieve. And us today are very lucky to live with the fruits of that achievement, and I feel like we're treating the risk kind of brazenly. So my question for you is, we often hear in response to these concerns that, well, Putin, Khomeini, they're war criminals, they're terrorists, as if they're too inherently evil or immoral for us to negotiate with. But meanwhile, this administration has financed a genocide in Gaza for the last year, and every day you're up there denying accountability for it. So, what gives you the right to lecture other countries on their moral?
So if you have a policy question for me, I'm happy to take it. If you want to give a speech, there are plenty of places in Washington where you can give a speech.
Yeah, but people are sick of the bullshit in here. It is a genocide.
You are abetting it,
and you are risking nuclear war in Ukraine for this proxy war.
Plenty of other places to give a speech. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt.
So yeah, of course, Matt Miller had nothing to say. He just did his predictably smug routine of dismissing everything this guy was saying, even though he's talking about very plausible scenarios where chain reactions of nuclear strikes happen, and also pointing out the obvious that the U.S. Has been funding a genocide for a year directly. I mean, I don't know. I don't have much like commentary to add to that. Just it was something I thought I should play here. But don't worry, we got more Matt Miller coming right up. This was, I think, a little earlier in the week. This was before the bullshit. You're full of bullshit. But here is Prem Thakur, the journalist I brought up last week as well, also taking Matt Miller to task. Basically, Matt Miller just hilariously, he finds himself in the most ridiculous series of contradictions that he cannot smirk or bullshit his way out of, and just has to like swallow it. Of course, like the unspoken thing here is that only weirdo freaks like myself probably pay attention to this shit, so it doesn't ultimately matter. But for my own little feeling of edification, and for, I assume, people that listen to this podcast as well, serve you up these little sound bites of Matt Miller falling on his face and so forth. So let's listen to him argue against himself.
Prem, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. What we're seeing in Lebanon, we saw a similar pattern with regards to Rafah. First, the U.S. saying that they wouldn't want to see Israel conducting major operations. Then Israel going ahead with what they called limited operations, and then this continued tolerance of sort of day-to-day attacks. That has led to over 44% of all buildings in Rafah being either destroyed or damaged, according to satellite photos. Which is to say that there might not have been a major operation in Rafah, but there was cumulative attacks that led to a good deal of destruction. So how does this precedent of Rafah portend for Lebanon?
So every conflict is different, but if you look at what we continue to engage with Israel about when it comes to Lebanon, is ensuring that they have the ability to attack terrorist targets, terrorist infrastructure, a terrorist organization. But ultimately, we want to see a diplomatic resolution.
Well, was that the case with Rafah, for instance? Not just in Rafah, but
we've never wanted to see a diplomatic resolution with Hamas.
Well, okay. Well, what about the ceasefire?
We wanted to see a ceasefire, but we have always been committed. We have always been committed to the destruction of Hamas. We did want to see a ceasefire, but we have always made clear that we wanted to see a different authority moving forward in governance of Gaza.
So the absurdity is pretty clear. We want a ceasefire. We want a ceasefire deal with Hamas, who we also will never give a ceasefire deal to because we want them to be destroyed and replaced by someone else. So who are you going to be negotiating with? Good God. There's a little bit more of this, and it's worth listening to because Matt Miller just keeps on digging himself deeper.
Okay, but so for instance, other UN satellite image shows that 66% of Gaza structures have been damaged. And you earlier today said that the U.S. supports the targeting of terrorist infrastructure, not civilian infrastructure. Does the U.S. believe 66% of Gaza's buildings are terrorist infrastructure?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Which is why we have been engaged to try to reach a ceasefire to end that conflict, which is why we have been pushing for a ceasefire to months. And I wish that Hamas would come to the table and work with us on a ceasefire. As you heard me saying earlier, Hamas has been absent for weeks, won't even respond to the mediators putting forward ideas asking whether they would agree to a ceasefire or not. Look, you can talk about Israel and the culpability that Israel has and the tough decisions that Israel needs to make. And it's absolutely true that Israel needs to make tough decisions to get to a ceasefire. But the way out of this conflict is a ceasefire. And it is Hamas that's missing in action right now that won't come to the table to talk about one.
Oh, tough decisions. That's a hilarious, polite euphemism for committing heinous war crimes. They love using that. At least Matt Miller does. I definitely notice him using it all the time. He said there too, he said culpability, and he immediately corrected himself to they have tough decisions to make, and that's how we get to ceasefire. What ceasefire, man? With who? All the dead terrorists? And there he goes off about, I mean, it's also bullshit for other reasons, but let's just say it's even true. Let's say Hamas is being stubborn and uncooperative and has never been cooperative this whole time, and on October 8th, they didn't already have very clear demands set in place. It's another thing, like during this 1 year anniversary of like morons reflecting and shit. They're like, I saw someone, I can't remember who, I watched too much shit in the last, well, I'm always watching this stuff and reading this stuff, but someone saying that they broke through those fences, and well, they didn't even say that, because then they have to reckon with the fact that they're in a concentration camp and are not allowed to leave. But Hamas attacked, killed and raped and blah blah blah, lies, and they did it all for no reason other than they hate Jews. Like, they couldn't be clearer about the objectives of the whole thing. It was to trade hostages for Palestinian hostages, of which there are more than 10 times the amount rotting away in Israeli murder, rape, torture dungeons. Hundreds of them children, by the way. Anyway, I've lost track of what I was talking about. Matt Miller being an idiot. So even just granting him the lies of Hamas is ignoring our texts, y'all. So what up with that? That's on them. This is all on them, guys. We're trying to make a ceasefire deal happen here. Even if that were all true, he just said in the previous breath, we never wanted to see a diplomatic solution with Hamas. So what the fuck is he talking about? I mean, it's ridiculous. But let's move on. I mean, on that general note, it's like all but admitted at this point that the U.S. has given up on trying any sort of ceasefire deal, which anyone honestly paying attention to any of this shit slightly already understood was the case the whole time. They never wanted a ceasefire deal. It was, as I've mentioned, somewhat recently, remembering that period of time when it was like the most anti-Semitic thing you could suggest was a ceasefire. And now it's like the placating word of the day. I mean, I've got just like mainstream headlines admitting it here. This is CNN. U.S. is not currently pushing to revive Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire deal, officials say. Yeah, that's to do with Israel-Hezbollah. Same principle is going on with Hamas as well. The other day, current U.S. president, shocked that people have a hard time remembering, is still the current U.S. president, J. Robinette B. He joined for the first time in his presidency. I love how he just doesn't give a shit right now. It's so funny. He came out to the press briefing with Pierre, whatever the fuck, and he fielded some questions very poorly. And the only part I really want to focus on is how he ended the whole ridiculous charade. He was asked very straightforwardly, how long are you okay with Israel bombing Lebanon? And this is, description is Biden smiles and ends the press conference. You kind of have to see it to really get the full effect, but like the look on his face is something kind of pricelessly evil. He basically almost imperceptibly shrugs his shoulders and gives a kind of like, what me worry, I don't know. I don't give a shit is everything his body language said. And the fact that you just field a question and then don't without saying a word just walk away is, oh boy, that's classic Biden. But this wasn't even out of dementia reasons. This is him just being like, you don't want to hear my real answer, which is A, I don't give a shit, which also means B, forever, as far as I care. Let them keep bombing Lebanon for eternity. So yeah, if you check out the show notes, you can find a link to that video. Next up, Blinken approved policy to bomb aid trucks, Israel cabinet members suggest. This was an article on DropSite News. This plays off of what we talked about last week with Blinken, old Tony Blinks, keep on Blinken in the free world, about how he definitely knew that Israel was preventing U.S. aid from entering Gaza and lied about it to Congress. And so, this doesn't surprise me in the least. This is shit everybody knew. if we didn't exactly have full-on receipts like that are coming out now, it was obvious that the U.S. approved of all of this behavior because they keep funding it and it's in everyone's face. It's like, if people on the internet know about it, I would assume people in the government who are making these deals and transferings of weapons and money are aware as well. I mean, the article's good. It's just, I don't even want to get into it. I've got a ton of other shit to talk about here. But again, if you really want the details on that, I would say show notes. But I'm just sort of mentioning it in passing as, tacking it on to the thing that I think I did get into a bit more detail about, which was what I already described, Blinken's what would be a career-ending, at the very least, scandal. In my mind, should be a string him up at the Hague scandal. A boy can dream. You got a banging tweet from my boy Ralph Nader, Ralph the God Nader. I love how this is like classic Nader tweet, because he ats like the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and AP for being criminally negligent news sources, basically. Let's read the tweet. Oh, and I'm a big fan of how he always lets us know that he wrote this tweet with his little dash and the letter R at the end. And keep in mind, this man's 90 years old. I'm still in awe of the fact that he's, unlike Joe Biden, the fake praise that people were heaping on him right before they admitted that he was old and dead, basically. Nader is actually very sharp, especially for age 90. I think I said somewhere earlier today that compared to Biden, he looks like, 60? So Nader had this to say: why are the views of dozens of American doctors and healthcare workers back from the horrors in Gaza not considered newsworthy by the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Associated Press? With U.S. journalists banned by Netanyahu from entering Gaza for years, how can the detailed descriptions and urgings of these valiant medical specialists be ignored? It's one thing for Joe Biden to turn his back on their letter addressed to him, but the mainstream media? Shame. Shame indeed, Ralph. And he's referring to an open letter written by 99 different doctors and I think otherwise healthcare workers who've seen hell in Gaza, and their letter describes it as such. The letter is fairly long, and I have to believe Joe Biden didn't read any of it. Maybe he wiped his filthy doo-doo ass with it, is more likely. Yeah, it's about 4 pages. They go into some pretty gruesome examples. Of course, they're just like probably the tip of the iceberg of just, the absolute horrors taking place on a daily, hourly basis in Gaza, which, dear listener, I'm assuming you're fully aware of said horrors, so I'm not going to get into that. But if you are curious, again, show notes, link to the Nader tweet, which has the letter attached to it as well. But speaking of shameful media, U.S. journalist self-immolates outside White House over Gaza. Shockingly, this also got very little coverage. Much like all the subsequent self-immolations that have happened after Aaron Bushnell, which that one I guess was too much to ignore. And of course, as a refresher, I'll just remind everyone that one was just kind of pushed aside as he was fucked up in the head, and I think he may have screamed something about Palestine while he was engulfed in flames, but who can be sure, was essentially how the media coverage of that went. R.I.P., of course. Now, this journalist didn't die. They lit their arm on fire. It's not really clear to me what the full intent was, but I'm going to say this was a genuine act of, looking of self-flagellation, I guess. I'll just read some of this from the newarab.com. Like I said, mainstream news is not really covering this as far as I could tell. Journalist set himself on fire outside the White House on Saturday after publishing a blog post where he expressed remorse over his role in shaping news stories that he felt made him complicit in Israel's war on Gaza. Samuel Mena Jr., reached out to a friend 3 hours before setting himself on fire, telling them to watch an Instagram stream where the journalist read from a script where he expressed regret at his perceived role in contributing to Palestinian suffering. It's a little weird to ask your friends to tune in for that, surprise them. But anyway, he then set himself on fire with images circulated online showing Mena Jr. draped in a keffiyeh, immersed in flames as people ran to help him. During the self-immolation, he screamed about misinformation and said, "I'm a journalist and I said it was okay." Moments later, police and passers-by poured water over his burning arm. He was taken to hospital for treatment for his injuries, which a DC police chief said were not life-threatening. Mena was a news photographer for Arizona's Family, a Phoenix-based broadcast network, and was previously employed as a video editor for Point in Time Studios, with news stories he worked on aired on PBS NewsHour. To the 10,000 children in Gaza that have lost a limb in this conflict, I give my left arm to you, he wrote in his post. I pray my voice was able to raise yours, and that your smiles never disappear. I guess that does make it clear his intent then. He wasn't actually trying to commit suicide, but goddamn, I guess I'm assuming maybe his arm is done for. I guess I just don't know. He also called for an end to, quote, settler colonialism and urged for a ceasefire in Gaza. Arizona's Family released a statement following his self-immolation, saying Mena Jr. had been dismissed. Arizona's Family expects its newsroom employees to conduct themselves with neutrality and objectivity. Mena is no longer an employee. Fuck you, self-immolating man. Mena's self-immolation happened during a rally marking 1 year since the start of Israel's war on Gaza, which has killed almost 42,000 Palestinians. The journalist had regularly been using his profile on X to share information and news reports on Israeli atrocities carried out in Gaza and Lebanon, with his profile photo being an image of himself in front of the Palestinian flag and the words, "From the river to the sea, dun dun dun." And the villain emerges. His friend, Micah Warnock Estrada, described him as a kind person with a deeply human heart, adding, "I only ask that you view Sam as human. That's all Sam was asking for, to see each other's humanity." So they go on to describe Aaron Bushnell, which everyone's familiar with, and then they continue with, "Last month, a man reportedly died 4 days after setting himself on fire close to the Israeli consulate in downtown Boston. The 45-year-old, who was later identified as Matt Nelson, published a minute-long video beforehand saying he was, quote, about to engage in an extreme act to protest the ongoing genocide in Gaza. I haven't mentioned this guy before. I wanted to, but, there's always so much shit to try to get through in the week. But one of the interesting things about the coverage, or rather non-coverage of that, is that any coverage that did come up failed to mention the location that he was in front of the Israeli consulate. I want to say some of the footage even said the innocuous building he was standing near. It's the man lit himself on fire outside of a local Wendy's fast food restaurant chain. A local Wendy's fast food eatery. But yeah, as others have pointed out as well, it's surely a sign of a good and healthy society when people are regularly lighting themselves on fire, probably one of the most horrific ways you could possibly choose to end your life or remove a limb, in the case of this most recent guy. But moving on. There's a great tweet from a veteran U.S. foreign policy advisor, Matthew R.J. Brodsky, in response to this story about Irish troops that are stationed in Lebanon, southern Lebanon, basically at the border, the Israeli-Lebanon border. It was looking for a minute there like the IDF was going to basically fuck them up, or try to, because of course Netanyahu, being the god man that he is, he declared all UN people get out of Lebanon, and they refused to. A lot of people over the last year have started noticing that there's a lot of solidarity between the Irish and Palestinians for kind of obvious reasons. So anyway, it was shown that the IDF was like very close to this Irish encampment, and it's not just Ireland independently sending their soldiers there. They're working with the UN in a peacekeeping capacity. But, some people didn't like this brazen act of defiance of our gods in the IDF. How dare these filthy Irish folk not move when Bibi says move? And so Matthew R.J. Brodsky said, carpet bomb the Irish area and then drop napalm over it. Totally sane, polite, normal thing to say as someone who's worked in like the DOD and whatever. I looked up this guy's like biography, and he's seen it all, man. He's in all the gross little smoky back rooms and whatever, and he's a repugnant piece of shit, easily discovered just by looking at his Twitter, like the top 10 posts he's made on Twitter recently. But I just thought that was a good one. Oh, the other thing about this sort of standoff, which did end, by the way, with the IDF retreating. But before that happened, some people commented that it looked very much so like Israel, the IDF, was using these Irish troops as human shields. Were they to fire upon or attack in some way Hezbollah, because they were all hunkered down, like right behind this encampment. So that's just some added hilarity. And of course, as I've droned on about in the past, the IDF is no stranger to using human shields in a multitude of ways. I guess I could just quickly say congratulations to President Sheinbaum in Mexico, who's just recently inaugurated. I saw a nice video, and there's a nice article about what the inauguration was like and about how it's a little glimmer of hope of some sort for just anything good happening in the world. So I think I've kind of talked about before as well, but her party in Mexico is like genuinely of the left, and they've already made a lot of good changes in Mexico and seem primed to make a lot more, as they have like a super majority. And as far as I can tell, Claudia Sheinbaum seems to be a good egg, a straight shooter. I mean, I guess time will tell, whatever. But it was one of the less depressing things I ingested media-wise today. I'm going to have to skip this UK bit I have. Save it for next week. Same with this Germany one. I mean, a little teaser, I guess. I had something from the UK about what's his face? Fucking the UK Trump. Totally blanking out his name right now. The guy, just another fucking idiot who thinks if he has weird hair that makes him like a populist or whatever. The British guy. Oh, my mind is leaking out of my ears. It's sundowning time for me. I mean, it makes sense. I do see the sun set and rise 16 times every 24 hours, so I'm just permanently in a state of dementia, really. Boris Johnson, that's the name. I didn't look it up, it just popped into my head finally. The story about Boris Johnson finding a listening device in his toilet that he believes was planted there by Bibi Netanyahu himself. More on that next week, I guess. And in Germany, this new party that's like on the ascent, the Alternative for Deutschland, or Alternative for Germany party, one of their party members has been accused of using forced labor at a Belarus farm. As I said in our timestamp segment up top, it's October 9th, so we're 2 days late to the joy and the festivities of October 7th. But this is the closest episode to that date, so of course I'm going to mention some of that. And as every week, as already has happened, Israel is brought up. But this is as I have in the notes here, the Israel/Lebanon/Iran/Palestine section. On the hey, it's been a year front, Al Jazeera released a scrolling list of names of those killed by the IDF in Gaza. The video is an hour long, and it takes over a minute and 15 seconds just to get through the 0-year-olds. And it's scrolling by at a pretty steady pace. It barely gives you enough time to really read the names, to be honest. So they could have actually made even a bigger point about this and slowed it down considerably. But anyway, the point is, obviously, it's a huge amount of people, and that's just the beginning of the list of, babies that didn't reach their first birthday. So that's always something fun to know about and look at. And I don't want to just do a whole retrospective of the whole year either. On that front, though, I would recommend checking out this documentary put out by the Gray Zone that was put out on October 7th, which does do a retrospective specifically on insane Hasbara throughout the year, and it goes through the year chronologically. All the hits, beheaded babies, rapes that there's no evidence for, etc., etc., etc. It's also a bit of a grim watch. I mean, obviously it's a grim watch, but there's some graphic elements to it, just as a heads up. Although you'll get that heads up if you watch, try to watch it on YouTube, because they make you click something that's I recognize that this might be upsetting. It's called Atrocity Inc., Atrocity Incorporated, and I watched it. It's good. I would say if you don't feel like reliving all that shit, totally fine. It could be a useful tool, potentially, for what I would describe as fence-sitting libs, people that aren't quite convinced that Israel constantly lies and does what all genocidal entities do. I learned a new word for this the other day, and I can't remember it now off the top of my head, but it's something about the mirror of accusation or something like that. But it's the whole every accusation is a confession. You just say that your enemy is doing the things that you're doing, and vice versa. So yeah, if you want that kind of retrospective thing, that's one place to get it, although there are probably many others as well. But I just have a few things that I've listed here as let's remember this and let's remember that. Remember that the vast majority of the hostages are in torture/rape/murder dungeons in Israel, including hundreds of children, and the Israeli hostages have been purposely killed by the IDF following official doctrine and by being far more interested in enacting bloodlust and supposed vengeance upon Palestinian and Lebanese and Syrian and Iranian, etc. civilians. Actually, what I had written down here first was, remember the Hannibal Doctrine. Again, if you check out the show notes, I have a link after the Remember the Hannibal Doctrine bit that says 9 minutes of testimonies from both Israeli soldiers and civilians explaining how the IDF killed their own people on October 7th. This is some well-worn territory for, podcasts of this nature. I mean, outlets like Electronic Intifada and the Gray Zone and Mondevice were talking about all this shit very early on, and now places like The Intercept and Splinter from The Intercept, Drop Site News, which is very good. Not criticizing it, just kind of sometimes wish that credit went where credit is due with this stuff, especially when people that were sort of mocking it or writing it off as crazy conspiracy shit are now the ones yelling from the rooftops about it. But anyway, so yeah, the Hannibal Directive or Doctrine, which says that essentially if an Israeli soldier or civilian gets kidnapped, it's better that they just be killed, because then they can't be used as leverage. This is an official doctrine. Look it up. I've talked about it a bunch of times on the podcast before. Last week, I brought up for the first time the Dahia Doctrine, which is another official Israeli military doctrine that essentially says the best thing to do as a military is immediately target civilians and kill them, and target civilian infrastructure and destroy it. Do this first, foremost, and unrelentingly. So it's like Netanyahu said something interesting the other day about, like, I think our actions speak for themselves, and boy do they. But like, so many people are still in like just insane denial land about all this stuff, and it's like they write it down in their fucking like handbooks and shit. It's right there. They have names for this stuff. So, you know, I guess I'm doing a sort of never forget list, October 7th style. Hannibal Doctrine, Dahia Doctrine. Remember that the Israeli hostages that have been released never accused Hamas of any sort of mistreatment, and journalists had to make up totally false stories out of whole cloth only to have the former hostages make public statements saying that these things were lies, and that the injuries they received, for instance, were the results of indiscriminate carpet bombing by the IDF. There was a famous instance of this that went down. I can't remember the girl's name, but she became this kind of celebrity. She was also this like big like poster girl for the Israeli hostages because she's like good looking and whatever. Yeah, while it was cool that she like set the record straight, she didn't retract it, but like she did it on Instagram stories. So I mean, of course, like the screenshots still exist, but her denying this totally made up story about her experience as a hostage. She said, no, it was nothing like that, and that the only injury I received while there was when we got bombed by the IDF. Also, remember, of course, that Zionists were planning to colonize Palestine well before October 7th, 2023, obviously, and well before 1948, and well before the Holocaust carried out by Germans, not Palestinians, and that pogroms against Jews were concentrated hugely within Europe for hundreds of years, or at the behest of the Roman Empire, even further back. And remember why Hezbollah exists. Israel occupied Lebanese land from 1985 until 2000. Israel invaded Lebanon in 1978, 1982, and 2006. Not to mention small border skirmishes is basically a constant throughout this entire time. And they still fucking occupy part of Lebanon called the Sheba Farms to this day. So, in all caps, I beseech you, who is the aggressor here, and why is the United States and their lapdogs in Europe and in the Commonwealths around the world so cultishly attached to this colonial ethno-state committing blatant genocide, not to mention all the rest of the unhinged cruelty? It's a bit of a rhetorical question, I suppose. That's kind of all I have to say about it being the 1-year anniversary of October 7th. Netanyahu has delivered an ultimatum to Lebanon: free the country from Hezbollah or face destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza. So this is, again, Netanyahu really trying to reach the people of Lebanon by delivering a video in English with no Arabic subtitles, and also just very much mafia-style threatening. It's just crazy to think about like any other sort of example like this. Like, Canada, you must remove Justin Trudeau from power or suffer the consequences and become like Gaza. England, you must depose Keir Starmer. You have 48 hours or prepare to be Gazified. It's just insane. And it should sound just as insane when a country like Lebanon is faced with these kind of threats as well. So now with Iran firmly in the mix, here's a fun story involving Joseph R. Word Biden. This is in the Jerusalem Post. U.S. to give Israel, quote, compensation if it hits acceptable targets in Iran. Israel has vowed a response to the attack, which saw over 180 missiles fired at Israel. No mention as to why Iran returned all of those missiles. Just, again, another unprovoked aggression. The U.S. has reportedly offered Israel a compensation package if it refrains from attacking certain targets in Iran, according to a report in Khan 11 on Sunday. I'm guessing that is an Israeli television channel. Amichai Stein told them that he had received reports from U.S. officials that the U.S. had offered Israel a compensation package if it refrained from hitting specific targets in Iran. The package would include a total guarantee of comprehensive diplomatic protection as well as a weapons package, and was offered directly in return for holding off on striking certain targets in Iran. So in other words, they're going to keep doing what they've always been doing no matter what Israel does, and they're basing it on if they don't hit certain targets in Iran. This is wild shit. Honestly, is this supposed to be Biden looking like Biden's like playing hardball with Israel? Is that what this is really supposed to come off as? Stein summed it up saying, an American official said, if you don't hit targets A, B, C, we will provide you with diplomatic protection and an arms package. Israeli officials responded saying, we consider the United States and listen to them, but we will do anything and everything we can to protect the citizens and the security of the state of Israel. In other words, fuck you in this ridiculous game of chicken. You've made your little red lines before and not done jack shit about it. You will always continue to keep the weapons and money stream and diplomatic protection stream coming our way. I'm gonna do what I want. The IDF has been in ongoing discussions with the United States over its response. So yeah, that's really the U.S. playing hard carrot and stick type geopolitical 12th dimensional chess right there. Hey Israel, if you don't blow up that nuclear energy plant, we'll keep giving you money and weapons. What a fucking joke. Oh boy. And I just wanted to say a little bit about, just in general, what's happened between Iran and Israel of late. It's so telling, it's so crazy how the U.S. and Israeli reaction to Iran, busting through Israel's supposedly impenetrable air defense systems with ease, and only hitting military targets, not killing civilians at all. This is deemed a failure by Israel and the U.S. It's like, hey, they didn't kill a single civilian. Fucking losers, we rule. Which obviously shows then. Again, you don't really need the Dahia doctrine to tell you this, but Israel measures military success by killing non-combatants and destroying civilian infrastructure. And then there's this whole, massive contradictory way of describing Iran as, the evilest, scariest, hugely powerful, demonic nation. But then also they're a bunch of losers who can't hit their targets, even though they did hit their targets. They fucked up military installations in Israel, which... This is another hilarious thing I saw. Israel is trying to basically not show any satellite footage or not show any footage altogether of where Iran made contact, and they went as far as to put obviously fake digitized cloud coverage over the areas that almost certainly were hit on this satellite images. Fucking losers. Anyway, that was just my 2 cents there. Let's get into this. What I'm Thinking About on the First Anniversary of the War by Thomas L. Friedman. Oh, one of my favorite fucking morons who has somehow won 3 Pulitzers or whatever. Thomas Friedman. He writes a typically stupid opinion piece here in the New York Crimes, and I'm certainly not going to read all of it, but let's just read some of it. So what am I thinking about on this first anniversary of the Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, Israel war? See what he did there? Look at all these guys ganging up on our poor little helpless pal Israel. Something my strategy teacher, Professor John Arkila of the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School taught me, all wars come down to two basic questions. Who wins the battle on the ground, and who wins the battle of the story? You can tell this is going to get pretty cerebral, pretty esoteric. A thinking man's opinion piece. And what I'm thinking about today is how, even after a year of warfare in which Hamas and Hezbollah and Israel have inflicted terrible pain on one another's forces and civilians, totally equally, right? More or less, just right down the middle, just tit for tat. No one has decisively won the battle on the ground or the battle for the story. Indeed, 1 year after October 7th, this is still the first Arab-Israeli war without a name and without a clear victor, because neither side has a clear win or a clean story. Did he mean to say clean story? We can and should sympathize with Palestinian statelessness and Arabs in the West Bank living under the duress of Israeli settlements and restrictions. But to my mind, there's nothing that can justify what Hamas attackers did on October 7th. Murdering, maiming, kidnapping, and sexually abusing, any Israeli they could get their hands on. Without any... This was the thing I read that said they had no demands. Without any goal, any story, other than to destroy the Jewish state. If you believe, as I do, that the only solution is two states for two indigenous peoples between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, the Hamas rampage set that back immeasurably. So nothing can justify killing, 700 civilians and 500 soldiers? Nothing can justify that. But killing at minimum 42,000 people, 98% of which are non-combatants, that could be justified by anything practically if you're the Jewish state. And what story is Iran telling? That it has some right under the UN Charter to help create failed states in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq so it can cultivate proxies inside them for the purpose of destroying Israel? And by what right has Hezbollah dragged Lebanon into a war with Israel that the Lebanese people and government had no say in and are now paying a huge price for? I love this bullshit about pretending that they care about the people and it's only Hamas and Hezbollah that we have issues with. Before I even go on, if I'm to go on, because this is already driving me crazy, I wanted to read a little bit about Tom Friedman here. This is the man we're working with. This is a article written in 2015. I'm only citing this one part of it. I didn't even read this whole thing. But the great Thomas Mustache Friedman is perhaps best known for encouraging the invasion of Iraq and subsequent resistance insurgency, civil war, thousands of Americans, and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi deaths, eventually leading to the formation of ISIS, plus the trillions in costs, by saying what they, Muslims, needed to see was American boys and girls going house to house from Basra to Baghdad and basically saying, which part of this sentence don't you understand? Well, suck on this. So that's Friedman's diplomacy as it relates to Iraq. Also, according to his biography, his high school years were characterized as, quote, one big celebration of Israel's victory in the Six-Day War. So this guy is basically a Zionist from birth. If you know anything about the Six-Day War, it's an insane war of preemptive aggression on Israel's part, in which, they gained the most a landmass in a single act of aggression, or series of acts of aggression. I mean, it was 6 days, famously. This was also the time when they accidentally, quote unquote, blew up an American naval ship, most likely because they were afraid of the ship inadvertently sending some sort of information on this Israeli military's whereabouts to, I think, Egyptian ships. Or they were just why not just have an added bonus here of, fuck you, America. You will continue to be our bitch because you need us to be your attack dog in the region. He continues to go on saying, But this Israeli government does not have a clean story in Gaza either. A clean story. Fuck you, Thomas Friedman. What the fuck are you talking about? This was always going to be the ugliest of Israeli-Palestinian wars since 1947, because Hamas had embedded itself in tunnels underneath Gazan homes, schools, mosques, and hospitals. False, 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 false. Even if it's true, you can't just... It does not justify massacring every fucking person there. There's a reason they work from within tunnels. You've trapped them in a very physically tight concentration camp prison. It could not be targeted without significant civilian casualties. I like how this starts off with like, all right, here I'm gonna both sides it, and I'm gonna do some digs at Israel. Immediately just goes into, and here's why Hamas made Israel do bad shit. Therefore, as I argued from the start, it was doubly incumbent on Israel to make clear that this was not just a war to defend itself, but also to destroy Hamas in order to birth something better. The only just and stable solution possible. 2 states for 2 people. Do you not know that... Okay, 2-state solution is impossible for a number of reasons, but let's just stick to the fact that the lawmakers, the people in charge in Israel, openly dismiss the idea. They openly dismiss the idea of any form of Palestinian statehood whatsoever, over and over and over again, in clear, loud language. But fucking Friedman's mustache is fucking burrowed into his ears and he can't hear it. Okay, here comes Friedman trying to both sides it again. Let's see how far he gets before he just says, well, ultimately Israel has to just keep killing everyone. It has to make, as my friend Matt Miller likes to say, tough decisions. The Israeli government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu steadfastly has refused to do that, referring to the 2-state solution. So much so that a year later, it has still not told its people, its army, or its U.S. arms supplier what it wants to build in Gaza in place of Hamas, other than, quote, total victory. No shit, you fucking moron. They're telling you loudly and clearly, and actually they have talked, like, Israel as a country, let's say, has talked about how, yeah, this will make great real estate. You know, I talked about those fucking Gaza boat tours that people are taking where they're like, I could place my little seaside getaway beach house over here. They do have actual tangible plans. You just don't want to hear it. With Israel still bombing schools to kill a few Hamas fighters hiding inside, yet failing to articulate any future for Gazans other than permanent war, it feels as though killing every last Hamasnik is the goal, no matter how many civilians die. Does it feel that way, Thomas? Does it feel that way to your little feely feels? Fucking absolute child-brained, fucking smooth-brained, dog-brained. These are all insults to dogs and children, sorry. Fucking moron. It's almost like they want to kill everyone at any cost. But that's a forever war that will undermine both Israel and America's credibility and embarrass Israel's Arab allies. God damn it, Thomas Friedman. I don't even want to look up how much fucking money you make from writing this kind of shit. It will give me an aneurysm. Here we go, back into the fray. But the lack of a good story is hurting Israel in other ways. See, they need the right storyteller at the helm. Israelis are being asked to send their sons and daughters to fight every day against Hamas and Hezbollah foes, yet cannot be sure if they are going to war to save the state of Israel or the political career of their prime minister. Yeah, because it's fucking obvious. God damn. I can't even fucking read more of this shit. So basically, Friedman is a never Netanyahuer. That's the fun position that Americans take up where they're like, no, I'm not a totally unhinged Zionist. I think Netanyahu's far-right government is problematic. A little. It's almost like they're genocidal. Oh, I shouldn't say that out loud. Oh my God. I mean, this is the fucking this is the same position that Bernie Sanders takes, our furthest left political representative in America. It's the Netanyahu government that's a strange aberration in the Israeli government. As long as we get a good progressive liberal guy, then everything will be fine. Yes, that's what the history of Israel has shown us, isn't it? There's a bunch more from this fucking Friedman thing, but fuck it. I'm not. My voice is giving out. I'm tired of reading this bullshit. Let's see how he lands. Does he stick the landing about the story bullshit? So on this first anniversary of the October 7th attack, I find myself most preoccupied with the fact that Israel is fighting a multi-front war, 7-front war if you ask Bibi, and Israelis still don't know whether they are fighting to make Israel safe for a Jewish democracy or safe for the Prime Minister's political survival. Safe for the ultra-Orthodox to never have to serve in the military, and safe for the Prime Minister to declare to the world he's defending the frontier of freedom in Gaza and Lebanon, while sustaining a morally rotten and economically draining settlement engine in the West Bank. How can you say that about the West Bank and then still support the entire overall project of Israel? You fucking idiot. You absolute donut, as Gordon Ramsay would call you. The biggest threat to Israel today is not Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Houthis. A united Israel can beat them all. It is those who are unraveling Israel's steel thread with a bad story. Profound shit from a stupid man. Read all 666 comments. Interesting. Ever notice how Thomas Friedman looks exactly like Satan? I think I'm going to leave it there. Actually, let's close it out with Senator Lindsey Graham talking about the flooding in the state that he represents and being unable to stay on topic and only able to go off about Israel for some reason.
I've been going all over South Carolina like most people. I hadn't slept much. But look what's going on in Israel. Our friends in Israel are surrounded by people that want to kill them, destroy them, a second Holocaust in the making. And Biden says be proportional. What is the proportional response to people who want to kill you and your family? Gosh. They're running out of ammunition in Israel. We have to help our friends to keep the war over there from coming here. They're willing to...
Good. I'm sure that, they are running out of ammunition. But don't worry, more's on the way. Just classic Lindsey Graham being a complete dumb fuck. What is the proportional response to people who want to kill you? Can the people of Lebanon, the people of Gaza, also answer your smarmy rhetorical question? No, because they're not people. At least they're not the right people. Alright. Some of the stuff I have to skip today. Teaser for next week. The Samson option, which is one of the craziest things ever. Another official doctrine of Israel that has to do with basically, if we go down, we're going to take down the whole world with us because we got enough nukes to do that. But we'll get into that more next week. And I got some good bits on China, and I guess I'll leave it at that. So be sure to check out the episode description. Within that episode description is a link to the show notes document, which, like I said, has links to articles, videos, etc. The episode description will also lead you to our Discord. Join up, drop in, say stuff. That's basically it, yeah. Rate, review, subscribe. If you write a review, I'll read it. 5 stars or bust, though, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'll read like hate hateful shit too. Who knows? Maybe I shouldn't say that. No, I don't know. I'll read reviews that also come with 5 stars, which I guess you could do 5 stars and still say a bunch of mean shit. But I'd prefer if you said something nice or at least neutral. I'm really shooting for the stars here. And finally, as I've made a habit of in the previous 5 transmissions, I'd like to close out with one of Jack Handy's patented deep thoughts. I bet the main reason the police keep people away from a plane crash is they don't want anybody walking in and lying down in the crash stuff. Then, when somebody comes up, act like they just woke up and go, "What was that?" Alright, ceasing transmission 006. See you next week, folks.
I cried when watching the footage of George Floyd dying face down. I fly my Black Lives Matter flag. It's the biggest one in town. But Palestinians have it coming when their buildings are bombed to the ground. Oh, love me, love me, love me, I'm a liberal. I marched with my pink pussy hat. I stood against Trump like a boss. Was proud to be in the resistance, tweeting out against his mishigas. But I don't blame Netanyahu when clearly the problem's Hamas. Oh, love me, love me, love me, I'm a liberal. I was angered by children in cages, felt helpless and full of despair. Their parents came seeking asylum from what must be a hellish nightmare. But when a child is killed in Palestine, it's 'cause Palestinians don't care. Oh, love me, love me, love me, I'm a liberal. Oh, another mass shooting. When will the shootings end? We need stricter gun laws to curb this violence. But when it comes to Israelis, well, they've got a right to defend. Love me, love me, love me, I'm a liberal. The Green New Deal's outrageous. The price tag is out of control. And don't even get me started on Medicare for all. But I've got no problems with the bombs we send Israel. Oh, love me, love me, love me, I'm a liberal. Yeah, love me, love me, love me, I'm a liberal.
The first voice recording was made in 1860. It was a 10-second fragment of the French folk song Au clair de la lune recorded by inventor Edward Leon Scott de Martinville. But who will make the final voice recording and when? What will it be? Who will hear it?